You are listening to the Backline podcast.
I'm Trey. This is Tristan. And you're listening to the Backline podcast. All right. Episode 14. For this one, we're going to talk about gear. Every musician loves to talk about gear.
Yep.
You know, and in recording this podcast, we are using the bottom of the bottom of the gear we have because all of our good or worth a shit gear is set up for recording, new songs and such, and we really don't want to touch it. So we have mic stands that are falling over, using hair ties to hold them. We're using our 2-channel audio box instead of our regular machine, so you might hear some weird clipping like just happened there. So we're just showing you it can be done with shitty equipment.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of what, and I can hear a live feed of the audio. And a lot of what I'll have to edit out is going to be there's like buzzing here and there, and this mic shocks me if I touch it, and I'm sure you can hear that in the little buzz that happened earlier. But it's A, you can do it with cheap gear, but B, it's like, I mean, we have our other mics occupied, but it's kind of fun to use the lower quality. Just while we're talking about gear, right? Because sometimes gear does make a big difference, but sometimes it doesn't.
Shit, yeah. I mean, good gear it does make a difference. It seems like there is, and no matter what spectrum of gear, whether it's drums, cymbals, guitar, strings, picks, anything like that, there's a fine line.
There is.
Right? We're not bashing having fancy gear, and we're not telling you need to have shitty gear. It's not how it works.
No.
But there's another glitch.
I don't know what that is.
It's certainly I mean, you can get the job done with.
Yeah. A lot of what like more expensive mics, like mics specifically as a piece of equipment, the nicer the mic, it's really the more accurate that mic's going to be as far as like audio representation. But you can get stuff done with cheaper mics. Like a lot of the mics that we use, I think our workhorse mic is actually a cheap one. It's the Behringer, it's like an XM 8500, which is like a $20 knockoff to the Beta 58s. So it's just like, it does an okay job. Obviously, it doesn't have quite the accuracy for some frequencies as the Betas do or the Sures do, but it does a pretty fucking good job for $20. I can get 4 of those, for the price of one of the other things, and it's like it'll do 80% the job that one of the other mics will do.
Yeah, and you guys will hear it. I mean, even on on Decline and Deadweight that we recorded. That was obviously DIY. We did it in our own studio.
Right.
And they used the Behringer mics that you're talking about.
Yeah. The overhead mics, I'll use them for overhead mics for the drums because they can do the oomphes pretty well. It misses the shine. But it does well for guitar amps because they have like a good amount of like, you get a lot of the whump that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Well, that's a kind of a thing to our sound is getting that oomph, whether it's live or recorded. So
no, absolutely. So I mean, they're not the best mic, but it does a good job. Now the mics that we're using right now for this, I would never use for recording any of our stuff. Maybe the one you're using, but only if we have a very particular vocal style. But this one is just an old mic. The capsule I think is also fucked up. It probably sounded better in its time, but
yeah, it's an old Shure model, but it was one from back when
it's a BD10.
Yeah. It was passed down to
Shure.
us.
I didn't know it was a Shure.
It was passed down to us. We'll put it that way, but it's been kind of beat up.
Yeah.
Like right now, there is a screw sticking out of it.
Yeah, it's
to hold
DIY screw to hold the capsule in. Yeah,
there's dirt bike helmet padding as the filter screens. So
yeah, it definitely. I mean, you can hear it when I talk. There's like a lot of static and whine that you wouldn't get in newer Shures, but that, and I bet the capsule's fucked up too. So like how the mics pick up audio, there's like a film in there that like picks up disturbances. I'm not going to science my way through this conversation, but it gets, when they get older, they can get fucked up.
Yeah, so that's the thing. There's a point to replacing gear when it needs to be replaced, but I think, especially me early on, was thinking gear was going to help me. Right?
Yeah.
I need that guitar because I picked it up in Guitar Center and I wrote a new riff and I know I can do that. if I buy it, I can write more new riffs.
It'll sound better. Yeah.
You know, if I buy it, I can write more new riffs.
Yeah, it'll sound
And,
better. Yeah.
You know, that might work for a while, but it's like it's not going to make you better. I mean, look at, you know, back to our origins, and if you go to our Substack, we actually have readings on our specific gear setups and how we started and all this, and it gets really in depth. So we'll try to kind of summarize that now, but our most used instruments are our cheapest.
Yeah. I mean, sticking specifically to gear, there's something to be said. Two points I want to make. A, you'll find people who are really good at playing, like, I have a thing for it, it's like guitarists. There's somebody I follow who's like a really good guitar player. It's like Ichio, and I forget his actual name. Nito, I think is what it is, but he does like a lot of clean stuff. So he's really good and can do intricate stuff. But what he'll do is he'll pick up cheap guitars, like a Hello Kitty $50 like micro guitar, and then he'll just, you know, look at it a little bit, he'll tune it up, and then he'll just play it, and it still sounds good.
Like him.
Yeah, it's the master's touch, you know what I mean? So like, yes, good equipment makes for better. Like once you're able to use good equipment to its degree that it can be used, use cheap shit. You know, you can get good on cheap as long as your technique is good and whatnot. Now the second point I was gonna make was my old drum kit was like a $100 pawn shop kit. And I have it in my basement still at my house. And I'll look at that and I'll say, I got that thing to sound decent. You know, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't like studio quality sound good, but it sounded good for what we needed it for.
But you tuned it up so nice and got it all, you know, all the bells and whistles onto it that we used it for the entire Sinner album.
Yeah, like there was no reason to get a better drum kit because it did everything I needed it to do.
The only reason you have a different drum kit now is, again, it was passed down to us from our uncle, and it's still of the same value. It's not a high dollar kit. Maybe I think back in the day it might have been, but
it's built a little bit more tough than my other one is. But,
it suits our style.
That and your guitar and whatnot, like your beater guitar, that was like another one that was like a garage
Jay
sailor.
Tercer. Yeah, Jay Tercer's Sears guitar.
You know.
And you know, that's the guitar that we use on Micromanager. Everything drop tuning, so everything from Micromanager on is played on this Sears Jay Tercer guitar. Until recently, she's been put through the ringer, so I did splurge on a very used Schecter.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's kind of supposed to replace.
It's going to replace it because we're hanging up the old Jay Tercer.
Yeah.
She's like a warrior that's been sent to battle too many times.
Yep. No, for sure. I mean, you can get it done with cheap gear,
but
you know.
But
like, there's nothing to be said. I mean, there's something to be said for having like nice gear, right? Like if you have like a nice guitar and you can play that guitar to that degree, great. But a trend I see is people who will buy like $800 guitar plus when they're just starting out, right? And they like own that guitar and it sits in a corner and it gets dusty, and then now you're gonna sell it for like $200. You know, I mean, more the merrier for the person who's gonna pick that up, who knows the value of it. But like, start out with something cheap, you know? Like,
Yeah. And now don't get us wrong. I've picked up guitars that, you know, that Mitchell guitar, right?
Yeah.
It was cheap. It was when Mitchell came out with their first electrics. So man, it might have been first.
I think it was the first line.
First line of electrics. And it was back, it had to be 6 years ago. I was trying to replace a Dean that I have that's got a floating Floyd Rose, which I was a fan of back in the day.
But make use of it proper.
Yeah, but with our style, we just don't do that anymore. I don't touch whammies. No. So anyways, I was trying to find something to replace it, kind of in a pinch, and picked up this Mitchell, kind of tested it at the store, but I'm like, it'll sound better with my rig, and it fucking didn't.
No, yeah.
It sounded terrible because it was like a weird single coil pickup in the front, and in the back was a humbucker. But it was so thin.
It was weird. Like, I know we talked about that guitar at some point in time previously, but it was weird that, like, I've never heard a guitar sound that bad.
It was bad.
Like, it was just out of sync with itself. And it was funny because I think when we were talking about it, it was when I think we were doing a walkthrough of your guitars at some point.
Oh, that's
what we were doing.
We did a stream where we walked through the guitar wall. The wall of guitars behind us right now.
And we talked about, like, that Mitchell was so short-lived that I forgot about it until
you
brought it up. And I was just like, wait a minute. Yeah, you did have that guitar.
That was awful.
It was terrible.
I just remember I picked it up, took it home. We tried practicing that day, and Tristan and I both looked at each other and were like, oh. And then I went back the next day and returned it. And the
it.
guy's like, what, didn't like it? I'm like, nope.
Yeah. You could put new pickups in it, but it was just kind of.
There was something about it.
I think the frets were cutting you too. I think was the other thing.
The frets were very
like
extreme.
I mean, even my Schecter, like the default pickups on that were better than that. They were soft, but it still worked.
Now that we're talking guitars, right?
Yep.
Schecter, best brand I've ever played. 100%. For the value.
That's fair.
For the value, I have 2 Schecters in my arsenal, and Tristan has 1.
Yep.
And I also have Ibanez and obviously the J Tercer that I talked about, and the Epiphone and the Charvel. But hands down, Schecter is the best bang for your buck as far as playability and just feel. They just suit
looks
us.
too.
Looks, they look like an expensive guitar, but none of them back here. None of my guitars are more than $700, and the only one that is close to that ballpark number is my baritone, which is an Ibanez, which I'm somewhat impressed with, but not really. It's definitely not the
it
build
be
quality
as expensive as it should be.
Yeah, and the build quality is not up to par with a Schecter.
No, I like Schecters. I had this discussion with somebody else I know who's a guitar player, but like their like middle ground area is really good. I've heard their low end guitars are shit.
I'm sure,
but like
I'll tell you what. I mean,
you get good value out of them.
Their middle ground is what I buy.
Yeah.
So like their C1, that was my first one I ever had, is a C1 Platinum Diamond Series, but it was on sale on Black Friday for like $300.
Yeah.
So we just snagged it, and it's got EMGs, quilt maple top, just a beautiful guitar.
And good refined looks too.
Yeah.
It's very much like you can tell it was care put into how it looks.
Even people who don't know guitars, like I've had people come up to me, like drunk people, oh, that's a sexy guitar.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean,
can we use that one more, right?
Yeah. So anyways, Schecter is my go-to guitar. My second favorite is my Epiphone Explorer, honestly, my Goth Epiphone Explorer. And believe it or not, that was actually probably my second most expensive guitar.
Yeah.
Behind the baritone.
That was a used one. You picked that up on like Marketplace, didn't you?
Less than $500.
Yeah.
But yeah, now don't get me wrong. Like when we played on the beater guitar that we played for a long time, that really didn't. I mean, it had a decent sound, but it didn't start sounding good until we did our modifications to it.
Yeah.
So what we did was the electronics are all fucked up, and it's still to this day. But we essentially made the neck pickup into a quote unquote kill switch. So you just, on the Les Paul style guitars, you can roll the volume off on each, well, depending on what kind of style you get, but this one's replicated after a Les Paul legit. So there's 4 knobs that you can control tone and volume on. And you roll the neck volume down, and then in the bridge we put a special pickup that I don't even want to talk about. You're going to go to the Substack and read because it is the secret sauce.
Yeah.
It's the secret sauce, man. It is a great pickup, and I think you even put
the same one in my
You
own
put
guitar.
the same one in your Schecter because you were so impressed with how it
Yeah.
sounds. So we won't name that pickup. You go read on Substack. But we also at that time decided to play in a lower tuning, so we put that guitar in drop B, raise the bridge, fix the intonation.
Yeah.
I always mess that word up.
Yeah.
But anyways, sounds great now.
Yeah.
And then, don't get us wrong, it took us a long time to find our tone.
Yeah.
We went through, I can't tell you how many amps we went
and
through.
cabs too, especially
Amps,
when we were like
cabs.
swapping through them, right?
Yeah.
When we had that moment where we could do that.
We went from like Black Star, PV, Bulgara,
Yeah.
Mesa.
Bulgara.
We finally landed on a Mesa Royal Atlantic combo because we didn't want to do the half stack thing at the time. I mean,
Yeah.
I barely had money to afford the Royal Atlantic combo,
Yeah.
and got rid of that, and then ended up getting a sweet deal on a Mesa triple rec solo head from back in the 90s with a Emperor 4x12 300 watt cab. So that was kind of like, okay, now we're playing with fire a little bit.
Now it's got some oomph.
Literally playing with fire, because then that amp got fried in a house fire.
Yeah.
But insurance claim, they gave us money for it as a brand new amp.
Yeah, it was, what's that called? At cost or
Yeah.
at value. Yeah,
At
they give it to
value.
you. So
I paid like not that. not close to what they're valued at, because the guy we bought it from was a friend of our uncle's, and he's helped us actually with our music career. He actually mixed and mastered our Micromanager album, so shout out Dan. But yeah, we purchased this setup from him, and then unfortunately the head got lost in a house fire, but gave us insurance. The insurance company didn't. We had so much that we had to file claims on because the whole house
had a lot of damage.
And I think they didn't want to deal with actually inspecting the head. So I remember it half worked, but it also was like half volume. Like something got fried in it.
Yeah.
And they're just like, no, we're taking it. Because I fought them to keep that head, because we used it on the all the way up until the hour.
Yeah.
And we were getting compliments on how the hour sounded. And even our studio engineer from Blast House reached out and said, hey, I have a guy who really likes your sound. What rig were you using during that? And I told him, because I'm like, whatever.
Yeah, you don't keep that.
No. But it was the triple wreck. But anyways, gave me full insurance money. So you know what? They gave me new Mesa price, which is upwards of $3,000.
Right.
And it's like, I did a lot of research, and I knew we were going the drop tune route. And I'll get off the guitar high horse.
No,
in a
it's all
second.
good. Yeah.
But went with Bogner Uberschall, and man, it's a beast. But again, back to the whole origin of this podcast episode, we do not take the Bogner.
No, you don't.
Gigging. It stays in the studio, and guess what we use for gigging? A Boss Katana MK2 head with the 4x12 cab, which I picked up the head for $250 off Reverb. And I have it sounding identical to the Bogner. Yeah. And, there's so many people who say, you got to have a tube amp, blah, blah, blah. But I take the Boss and I pair it. We've split our signal, so I pair it with my TC Electronic bass head. And I got people like, dude, your tone. I mean, we have another Substack writing on that.
Yeah.
And,
but it makes a bit, like, it's the amount that you can get done. I mean, it's missing some things, right? Mm-hmm. Like the Boss, when it's plugged into this setup, it's missing like the punch.
Oh, it's definitely not.
Like it's missing that like oomph. Like at least it's missing maybe 10 to 20% of the oomph, the push
but
power.
Again, when you go to venues, do you turn it up that loud?
No, right.
Exactly.
You're not going to get that anyway. So it makes sense not to bring it. The point of your, like the reason you're saying that is that it does 80%, if not 90% of what the more expensive cab can do.
Exactly. And so you go to a gig, right?
Yeah.
Like you're saying, you're not going to get to use the Bogner for what it's worth.
No, you're not, because it pushes so much sound. I mean, unless you're on like a fucking $3 million stage, but at that point, you already know what equipment you want anyways. You know what I mean?
You can pick and choose.
Yeah. When you're starting out, you don't need, even starting out, like we would hardly need this.
No, God,
in the long run. Yeah.
We would never need a 4x12. It took us forever to get to the half stack, right?
Yeah.
Because we were still finding ourselves and we were making it work. So, yeah, I mean, tone is a huge thing that you have to figure out yourself. But what we're saying is we've done the expensive route and the cheaper route. And guess what? The cheaper route, we play 90% of the time. The only time we bring out the expensive stuff is when we're in our studio and we're not going to take it or haul it.
Right, exactly. If it's stuff that we can like afford to keep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is modelers.
Yeah, modeling amps are pretty good these days too.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So what we do with our studio here at My 134 HQ is when we do scratch tracks, I actually run my Line 6 Pod HD500X, which has some badass presets on it, and I've actually got that thing sounding identical. Not identical, but as
pretty
digitally
good.
Identical as you can get it to the Bogner. And that's what we do our guitar scratch tracks on. That way I'm not bothering anybody.
Yep.
And I can edit them quick. But yeah, I mean, guys, it's awesome. We have too much gear. But, we do have all different types of gear.
No, for sure. And like your modeler, if we wanted to, we could just use that and a DI pedal to just do like your guitar tracks. Actually, that would be easier than 100%. Recording the amp and whatnot.
Well, that's like we play with bands who I'm like, there's been two that I've played with and I'm like, yeah, they got pretty good tone. And I'll talk to them afterwards. And the guy's like, yeah, I show up to the venue with my guitar and then my modeler in the guitar bag, and that's how I show up. And I'm like,
and just run it through the PA.
And we tried that once. We actually took the Line 6 pod out, and you're missing something, but it's not.
It does 90%. So if you you don't want to haul that stuff around, you can do it cheaper. You can
absolutely.
do it with less. I guess the point, the roundabout point we're trying to make with this is that you don't need especially when you're not you're still figuring your tone out and whatnot and all this stuff.
Yes.
You don't need expensive gear. You can do 80 to 90% of what you want to do with cheaper gear and modifications too, because you can modify shit. You can modify guitars. Drums are only modular. You can always add more expensive bits and pieces as you go, but you can get 90% of it done with cheap stuff. With amps and cabs, you can always replace the speakers if you're technically savvy.
Oh, there's so much you can do.
And then the amp head, I guess you can't change too much, but there's a lot of EQ available there. You can also pedal your way into a good tone. I mean, there's a whole genre based on the amount of pedals you can get.
Tube amps, you can change out tubes, give it a different flavor and all that shit. But that gets expensive again. If you want to,
but you can do you can find a lot of shit just with pedals that can be cheap too, cheap pedals that change your sound a little bit. I mean, shoegaze is a whole genre based on the amount of pedals you can get. But
just know this: the more gear you buy, the more you're stuck with because it resales like shit.
Yeah, it's like buying a car. You don't get your value back for it.
Well,
which is to your benefit.
If people even want it, right?
Yeah, who wants this gear, right? If you can sell it. So but that's also, to its own point, you can find good gear used.
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
If you know what you're looking for and it's been treated right.
Yeah, a lot of my guitars, I got good deals on them because they were used.
I mean, my first kit was a pawn shop kit. That was
people
used.
just want to get rid of it after a while.
Oh, my son stopped playing his drums.
But that's also a problem, right? Because if you're the guy with all the gear and you're
it's a catch-22.
So a lot of the venues we play now have their own live sound, and we've got an old setup from when we first started. It's a couple of custom speakers, and then we upgraded and added on to some Harbingers and a Mackie mixer that
it gets fucked up every now and then.
Half of it works. But anyways, we don't need it anymore. So it's it kind of just collects dust and it's a paperweight. So that's what, and technology has come so far since then that nobody really wants that shit. They're going to buy new. It's tough. Just know that if you're going to go out and splurge on gear, you're probably going to be stuck with it.
And it takes up space and it's hard to store.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just had a great point to make, but I just totally lost it. It was about gear. Yeah, I mean, it all depends on use case, right? You got to run into the problem first.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, you live and you learn, and that's what music is in general. And it's kind of just finding your own way.
Right.
That's everything music related.
Yeah.
What you're playing, your style, all that. You just do it. Because if you look at Mile 134 when we started almost 10 years ago.
Right.
Which 10 years in 2025, a decade of Mile 134. Yeah. But we sound nothing like we did back then.
No.
So that's the cool thing about music.
You evolve.
Getting a little off track, but I'm saying with the gear, you're going to evolve gear. Like I just said, we went from half stack combo amps to modelers to half stack tube amps to top line tube amps to back. Now we're kind of mid-level with the solid state, but still 4x12 half stack.
Yeah.
And a minimal pedal board. That's something I didn't even touch on, but
yeah, no, right, absolutely. Well, because you use you get the big pedal boards and you get tired of all the toe tapping you have to do.
If I didn't have to bring pedals at all, I wouldn't. But there's again, go to our Substack. There, I show you my pedal board. It's literally less than 7 pedals.
Yeah.
But they are all key because I've tried to eliminate them and I can't.
No.
Because we're splitting signals and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, it's gear is fun, but don't get in that trap.
Don't fall into the spending trap.
I've done it.
It's super easy to sink money into music stuff because you always think that's going to be the thing that makes you better, but really it's you. You got to sit down and make yourself better before you can buy the gear.
My favorite thing I ever heard, I think it was Jerry Cantrell. Probably my favorite guitar player because he's just
simple
tasty,
and good,
tasty riffs, tasty solos. I mean, Alice in Chains is one of the best bands in the world, or was with Lane.
Yeah.
I still like them now, but man, that Dirt and Facelift album.
They were really good.
Oh,
Those whole albums are
top
awesome.
10.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, but Jerry Cantrell said that he's got so many people trying to copy his tone.
Yeah.
And he's very open about what he uses for gear. And his quote that I loved when I read was, "It's still my fingers, my flesh on the wood of the guitar.
Yeah.
Nobody can copy that." And he's absolutely right, because I've had, I'm 90% self-taught of a guitar player, but back when we took some lessons, I was playing this beater guitar, and my guitar teacher took it, and he played it, and it sounded like him.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, this is a
The
pretty
master's
good
touch.
guitar." Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's literally you. It's the player. Just like in our other life, before the band, we were dirt bike riders and racers, and it was always, it's the rider, not the bike.
Yeah.
Obviously, being set up on a bike the correct way is crucial, and having a bike that meets your needs.
Yeah.
But again,
Tuned is different than like mega customized.
Yeah.
You can tune a guitar to fit your needs. You can tune a bike to fit your needs, but
And again, back, Tristan and I did well for ourselves racing, and we were on bikes that were
cheap
like
shit bikes.
10 years older
Yeah.
than what the current year was, and we were beating people on brand new bikes. It's,
Yeah.
guys, just go out and do it.
Yeah.
Go out and learn.
Let your gear chase your skill. Don't chase your gear with your skill level. So like, don't buy gear ahead of your skill level. You should always have gear that's like technically considered below your skill level. And I think that that's the easiest way to save money, A, and B, to keep yourself original and keep yourself like kind of true to form. You don't.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you'll see these people who get on stage with these guitars that are all gold plated and everything, and the drum kit that's not scratched up and
they
really
know
clean.
it.
Right, and they know it, but it's like then they get up there and they can't play to it. It's like, come on, like we can all see you spend a lot of. It's different if you get a good deal on something that's nice, yes, but like if you're up there with gear that's like really nice and you can't play it, like everybody knows.
Yeah,
like you it's like you can smell the fallacy here. It's like it's.
Again, that goes back to our most listened to episode, and our last episode was the pet peeves, right?
Yeah.
We talk about being authentic. That's one thing in there we talk about in the pet peeves, but it's the one that caught most people's attention. But being authentic. Don't use the gear as like a fucking mask.
Yeah.
You need to have your own style. It needs to be in line with your gear.
There's something to building character on cheap shit gear. Like
Hell
some of my favorite bands that we've gone and seen are just people who are, oh, like so and so is using a guitar that's missing like 2 pegs, but god damn, he can play the shit out of it.
Jack White uses a shit guitar.
Yeah.
He openly admits it. Josh Homme, I don't know how to say his name, but for Queens of the Stone Age, he is notorious for using this little 15 watt. I think it's called a Gorilla amp to get his tone. So it's like there's character in shitty gear.
Yeah,
there
is,
and that's man.
Well, then you can find your tone. Yeah, this could be a fucking.
We could go in so many
for a couple
rabbit
of
holes.
hours here. Yeah.
So yeah,
there's a lot to talk about, but I think the moral of the story is that you should not. You should use your gear. Don't try to upgrade just because you can.
And know that you'll be stuck with any gear you buy.
Yes.
So, yeah, like I said, guys, we get pretty deep into this on our Substack. We take you through, we take our paid subs, and then there's some free posts as well. But we do a studio tour where we break down all the gear. Be sure to follow us on Twitch, because we did do a wall of guitars kind of stream where we walked you through the story of each guitar that I have. And yeah, we go through the pedal boards on our Substack, amps, kind of what we're using live and in the studio. You guys heard that we use the nicer amps in the studio, the nicer gear, and then live we try to make it work with the cheaper stuff. So
absolutely.
Yeah. What else is gear?
I don't know. I think we covered most of it. I mean,
like you said, though, I think in the studio, you do have to have nice microphones that are going to be receptive of what you're doing.
Definitely depends on what you're doing. Because there's a lot of different ways you can mic things, and every studio engineer has a different idea.
But let's talk about this.
All right.
You don't need fucking Pro Tools.
No.
Jeez.
You don't. It depends on the DAW you're used to, but don't let anybody convince you that one DAW is infinitely superior to the other, because you can get, if you know how to use it, You can get like 90% of the way.
Yeah.
Pro Tools is what they use in like high production shit, right? Like if you know how to use Pro Tools, you will make, good sounding stuff. But for anybody who doesn't know how to use it or hasn't learned how to use it, there's no reason to invest in an expensive piece of software and just try to pick it up and go. But if you're trained in how to use it or you're willing to learn how to use it, you might as well get it because that's kind of like the last stage of learning how to mix things.
Yeah.
We stick to Ableton because it's just not as expensive, A. B, I've kind of learned how to use it at this point pretty well. And C, the license I have is perpetual, so I don't have to pay for it anymore. And that just makes sense for my wallet.
Well, and when I'm doing guitar riffs or tracking, I'm using Studio One.
Right. But you can just export out of that.
And it's
the key.
an old version,
It's old Studio One, but
it works. But, to Tristan's point,
you don't need the most expensive software.
You don't need expensive gear. I mean, I remember where we were back at our old studio jam place, whatever you want to say. We were using GarageBand and literally setting up shitty mics
in front of improvised bass traps,
covered
and sound
by
traps.
blankets.
Yep,
yeah,
that's right.
So that's how we started doing and we have those old demos and they suck, but you know what? It's something to build off of. And now we have a functional studio.
Yeah. And the key is, because you started with the Pro Tools argument, is that I can learn how to do 90, like I can learn with Ableton, right? I keep using the 90% analogy. I'm going to stop that. But I can learn on Ableton and that information and that skill will translate over to nicer software. You're not losing skill between.
Oh, yeah.
It'll take some learning to figure it out, but like how to use the chains and whatnot will translate and how to use the stuff. And it's the same for gear. Like you can build skill on a fucking Hello Kitty drum kit if you want to, like you can do that. And then like that skill will translate to a nicer kit once you're able to upgrade. And it's the same thing with guitars. Like I think everybody starts on an acoustic guitar, right?
Oh,
And it's always this cheap shit 3/4 guitar where the strings are way too tight or they're too loose. And you start learning that way and your fingers fucking hurt because you can't adjust the action on the thing and you're getting all these weird cuts. But that's like a stepping stone. Then you get a nicer guitar and you've built your finger muscles up and you know how to use this. And it's like, wow, this feels really good. Oh, I've upgraded. Like that's just that's how the progression should be. The problem is if you buy a $1,000 guitar and that's your standard now when you're fucking learning, and then like you figure out you can't play, but you decide to pick up a guitar again in 10 years and you're like, oh my God, I suck.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with this rant.
No,
but.
it's all relative,
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, people are going to fucking do what they want.
That's true.
We could tell them this, but they don't.
Yeah.
They'll have to make that mistake.
Here, I tell you what, why don't you spend $1,000 on a guitar, sit on it for 3 years, and then sell it to me for $300?
Yeah,
How
no
about
shit.
that?
Send them our way.
No, I don't know. I'm all about cheap shit gear. I like being able to improvise with cheap stuff too. I think also builds character in floating quotes. I think there's something to be said about learning the hard way when it comes to stuff.
Oh,
But
yeah.
That's my opinion. I'm a firm believer in just making shit work, and I'm not about the idea that you need expensive gear in order to make music.
This we'll wrap this up here, but it also goes back to on previous Substacks, we actually talk about studio time and whether to go to the studio or try to do it yourself.
Yeah.
But again, it's trying the whole thing with music, because you're not going to make money at it. You're lucky if you get some exposure, right?
Yeah.
It's the
fun.
knowledge and the process of learning, right?
Yeah.
So like we used to just by default go to the studio and figure
Right.
it out. Like figure out songs.
I don't want to. Yeah, we know how to make the music, but we don't know how to use the software.
But what we took it to the next step, and it's like, let's demo it at home. And then we would demo it, and then we would sit there and pick apart songs and figure out what, you know. And then it's just an evolution.
It's improving your craft.
Yeah.
Right.
And now we're doing our own shit in our house, in our studio. So it's like, that's the fun part with music.
Yeah. I mean, the end goal is a song, right?
Yeah.
And like the know-how on how to like make that song. I mean, like the end product is always the same. You're going to have varying degrees of like what makes up the end product. You know what I mean? Like you can still record a good song on shitty gear. You can also record a bad song on really good gear, right? Like if we look back at Sinner, I'm just going to use some examples, right? Sinner is very much like, we don't know how to use the software. We know how to make the music, right? And that's why when we got in there, I couldn't drum very well, right? Because I wasn't like,
Well,
on
and we
time.
had to program guitar tracks.
Everything was like, it needed some more polish from the engineer. So it was probably a good thing to go in there and do that and learn that process.
Right, we learned the hard way.
But now we're doing it ourselves where we're more skilled musicians and we can also refine the end product, the song, with know-how on recording. But it doesn't mean that we need the nicest microphones to make the in-between of that song sound better and or worse, or more clear, I think is the better analogy there. But the end product is always that song. Because, if we make a comparison to, the 80s, right, and the 90s, when they were using, one microphone to record, 6 people at once.
Yeah.
We're basically have that quality of audio going on in our studio right now for cheaper than they were doing it back then.
Exactly.
But, yeah. I don't know where I was going to finish that tangent. But
no.
It revolves around the same topic we're saying.
It's tough because this is one topic you could keep going on.
Yeah. And it's all, we're saying opinions, but it's all based in.
Dude, here on the Backline podcast.
It's only opinions.
It's only opinions.
And only bad ones.
And guess what? It's our opinion because we've been doing it almost a fucking decade.
It's a learned opinion. It's not.
Oh, yeah.
It's built off road experience.
I'm the kind of person that you can tell me the wrong way to do shit, and I'm not going to listen until I do it. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't work. So we're just telling you that because that's what we've gone
and
through.
Who knows? Maybe 5 years from now, we come back and we listen to these. And
but
we're
that's
going to be
the point.
Who's this fucking idiot saying you can't
that's
record with nice gear?
Dude, that's the point. That's how I learned. That's how we roll.
That's
it's
where we're at.
We're going to tell you this because we've done it. But you know what? Maybe we, like Tristan said, a couple years from now, we look back and we're
who
like,
are these guys?
Idiots.
Yeah, these fucking morons.
But we don't care because we're straight up. Yeah. We're telling you.
That's where that's where we're at right now. Yeah. That's my opinion as of fucking October 13th, 2024, is that you can use shitty gear to make good music.
Damn right.
All right.
That's the moral of the story. And I would like to add.
All right. Here we go. Hot take.
Well, this is one of my main reasons for doing the gear, right?
Yep.
Doing the gear podcast. Just know you're going to be stuck with it.
Yeah.
So
that's because we run into that.
Yeah, we've got gear spread out.
That one hits home.
Yeah, we've got gear spread out a couple of places just because of we've accumulated too much. Anyways, thanks guys for tuning in. This has been the Backline Podcast. This episode is episode 14, entitled Gear. I'm Trey.
This is Tristan.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Backline Podcast.